The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning and welcome to this month's deep dive on the basics of the BOSS Report Designer. My name is Rick Judd. I'm with the Professional Services Group. Right now I've got your microphones muted, but feel free to ask any questions you have in the GoToWebinar control panel for questions. Hopefully we'll be able to answer these as we go through the webinar, but certainly we'll have time at the end. So today we're going to talk about the basics of the Report Designer. If you've seen it before, it's fairly robust. Like anything else, the simple things are simple and the harder things are more difficult. So first off, what does it take to have access to the Report Designer? If you're an enterprise client, you have access to the Report Designer. It depends on your comfort level of how familiar you might be with some of the controls and how to work it. But there's some steps that have to be taken care of before you have access to it. One of the things we need to know is your outside IP address. That's the address that you're going to use when you access a Report Designer. We need that so we can allow you access to our firewall. Obviously, also, you have to have the Report Designer itself. There's different versions of this, and the versions pretty much match different versions of BOSS. As I'll show you here in a minute in the release notes, it will tell you which version of Report Designer you need with your version of BOSS. So it's very important that you use the right version of the designer. Then after we have your outside IP address and we give you access through the firewall, there's some other configuration settings that we would send you, and you would actually put those into the Report Designer. Also, we have a new document on the support site in the knowledge base that kind of goes through most of what we'll talk about here today and probably some additional detail. But anyway, that's the basics of what it's going to take to get you up and running on the Report Designer. So if you can see my screen here, I mentioned before about the release notes. So each version of BOSS has release notes, and in the release notes, there's a section in here where it talks about what version of the Report Designer is required. So it's very important to use the right version of the Report Designer with your version of BOSS. If you use a newer version, one of the things it's going to ask you, or there's going to be a dialogue, it's going to ask about upgrading the reports. And that's something you do not want to do. So you always want to be careful to use the right version of Report Designer. If you use a newer version and you convert your reports, potentially, and in fact, probably, those reports then would become unusable because we've made changes to them in the new version of the designer, and you don't have those changes in BOSS itself. So be sure you read your release notes for a number of reasons, but one of those, if you use a Report Designer, is to make sure that you're using the right version of the designer with your version of BOSS. So to illustrate a little bit of this, we've seen what version we need. And so in my example, I'm going to use the incorrect version of the Report Designer first. So we'll go ahead and launch that. And this is what it looks like after you've got the configuration settings made. It's going to have a connection there for your instance of BOSS. Potentially, you could have your test site in there as well, but you'd select the correct version or the correct site to use the designer, and then you press the OK button. And here we go. It's on my other screen here. So then you'll see a notice like this. And if you ever see this notice, as I said, you don't want to upgrade the reports. If for whatever reason you're using the correct version of the designer and you're going to the right version of BOSS and you still have this screen, I would say that you still need to say no and then contact support and explain to them it seems like there's some sort of mismatch. This is the part that's going to get you into trouble. When if you go ahead and you say yes, go ahead and upgrade the reports, that's the part that's going to potentially probably make your reports unusable. So here I've used the wrong version of the Report Designer with my version of the database, and so I'm going to say no. So now we'll use the correct version. So I'll launch this other version of the Report Designer. So this time I didn't get any error messages and it took me right to the designer. So this is what it looks like when you first launch it. A couple different ways you can create new reports. A lot of times it depends on if you have an existing custom report that you want to modify, or it's an entirely new report, or if you want to fashion a new report based on the BOSS standard reports. So one of the things I'm going to show you here in the beginning is how to create a new report based on one of the BOSS standard reports. And to do that, I'm going to click on the New button. I could also go up here to the File menu and select New. At that point in time, I would just go ahead and give it a name. So in this case, I could say it's going to be a demo contract, and then it would pick a type. So I want this to be a contract. Oops, so I'll pick contract here from my list. The checkbox here for published, that just means is the new format published to the BOSS site or not. Initially, you may start working on the report. What takes a lot of work. You're working with it. It's not ready for everybody to use yet. In that case, you would not publish it. When you're ready to publish it to the other users so that they can use the report, then you would select the publish option. The other thing that happens, or the other thing we see here, is the different branches we could have this report available to. Sometimes I've had people make the statement that I've worked on this custom report and I can't, nobody can use it. And sometimes that's because you forgot to select the branches. So you would select each of the branches that this report is available for. Optionally, you can put a description in here to perhaps explain a little bit more about the report. But in the end here, I could say, okay, I want to create a new custom format based on the standard contract, and I gave it a name of demo contract. So I could go ahead and say, okay. And so that's going to come up with the editor, and it's going to show me essentially the existing standard format and allow me to start customizing it. So here's our standard format, so I could go ahead and make some changes in here and then save it. I've already given it a name of demo contract. So this is one way that we could do this. There's another way we can do it as well. So let's say I already have an existing customized format and I want to make some modifications to that. In that case, I'm not going to base my new format on the standard, but instead I'm going to base my new format on an existing custom. So I'll go here and I'll use this open button. Same kind of thing though. There's an option up there at the file menu. In this case, I get a slightly different dialog. So I'm going to select the type to contract because I'm going to look for an existing custom contract. I'll say find. And so here I see perhaps this is the one I want to fashion or I want to work on or base my customizations on. So I'll select the sample contract and I'll say okay. So at this point in time, I've got, looks very similar, but it's my changes now are going to be based on that sample contract. So if I want to save it as something else, I can come up here and I can say save as, and I can give it a name. So it's kind of the same thing as we saw before, where I give it a name, what branches is it available for, and then the description and those kinds of things. So I can change some of these properties here. If I want it to be a different branch, I want to give it a different name, those types of things, I can make those changes here. So a couple different ways I can create new formats. If I want to make a change to an existing format, like I've got my sample contract here, I could go ahead and I can make the changes here directly and then save those. So some other things I want to talk to you about in the designer here itself is some other options. We've already seen some of the options up here in the file menu where I can create a brand new one, and that's based on the existing standard contract. Open, where I can go find an existing customization and then save and save as. Some other critical menu options here that you might use are the report menu, where we have properties. And we've seen this before. So this would be a place where I could go ahead and I can change the name. I can say whether it's going to be published or not. The branches, we've talked about that. These are the branches we can use it for, and a description as well. So that's one of the options there for our properties. I can publish this. So right now it's not published, but if I want to publish it, I can just select that option. I get this a verification, and I can say okay. And then it would publish and become available to the other users. If I no longer need the report, I could just outright delete it. So a couple of options there with the reports menu that I think you might find that you use commonly. A couple more things on the screen here itself, the editor itself. Probably some of these you've seen in other software, where we've got this toolbar over here where we can create labels, we can create checkboxes. We've got the option to create rich text. That just means that we can have styles in the text, where we can have bullets, we can have bold, we could have underline, those kinds of things. That kind of rich text box allows us to do those kinds of things. We can have pictures and we can have shapes. a lot of different things we could do, and we just drag and drop these out here onto our editor form. Some other things we see over here, and I'll go ahead and expand this area over here on the right. We've got a field list. So we're going to draw this information from the database. So in this case, we've got a field list. This is the information that we furnish to you to use with the report editor. So I can go grab different fields and I can put them out here onto my editor, and then those become available to the report. Some other things we can do if we want to customize some of the fields we have, we can actually make what we call calculated fields. So here's an example of one of those. So I could say edit the expression in here. And here, this is pretty intense, and it's a little bit beyond what we're going to talk about here today. Just so you realize that you can create calculated fields, and those can take some of the information we've got and format it in a special way. So you can have it be, grab a field as part of a sentence, part of a paragraph. In this case, we're concatenating a great number of fields into a single kind of a paragraph here. But this is some of the power that's in the report designer itself, so we can take some of those fields and customize them still some more. Some other things we can do, we've got this little properties area down here. And so this allows us finer control over what the fields are going to do and how it's placed onto the report editor itself. So in this case, we could change, the font, we can change the style. We've got some other options in here, whether it's going to word wrap or not, it's visible, yes or no. And then, some other things like, can it shrink or grow? So we've got a number of different options here that we can use, again, greater control over the field itself. Some other things we see here are these different bands, and some of these are fairly simple. The report header, that's simple enough. It just means we're going to print everything that's in the header. We're going to print that one time for the report, and we're going to print it at the beginning of the report. Then we've got a page header, and that means it's just going to print on every page, but it's going to print at the top of the page. And then almost every report has a detail band, and so this is where the contents would show typically. We'd see that in the detail. In this particular report, we've got multiple group headers, and again, this just allows us to group, like, our subgroup different elements of the report within the detail band and within the report itself. And again, that's pretty much an advanced topic, but to go through some of the more simpler bands, down here at the bottom, we've got, again, the page footer, and this would be where you have things like your page count, maybe the date, things like that. And then we can also have a report footer. So the report footer then would be the very final page, anything else you want to have at the closing of the report itself. So to get back to editing some of this form here, some other things we can do up here in this little toolbar area up here, we can change the fonts, we can change the alignments, we can change the styles, a lot of different things we could do up here at the top. If I was going to do any kind of customization, let's say I was going to grab or put a new label on here, I can come over here and grab the label, and I can drag it out here to the editor, and I can just drop it where I want it. So in this case, I'll double click on this, and I'm just going to type in here deep dive as some sample text. Let's say I didn't want this picture here, so I can just highlight it and press the delete button, and maybe I'm going to drag a different picture out. So I've got this picture here, and again, this probably works similar to how you've used things like this in the past, where you can just kind of drag and drop the component onto the editor. We can grab these handles and resize it. We also have what we call smart tags up here. So if I had a picture that I wanted to include, I can come up here and I can browse for the image. So let's say I was going to use this as my image. So I can browse for that, and I can put it up here in my picture box. But then we can get down here to, maybe some of this is a little bit cut off. So some things we could do down here with our properties is I could change how it's displayed. So maybe I would say, this is how I want it all to show up in the box. But again, that's what our properties allows us a little bit finer control over some of the elements in our report. So some other things I can do, maybe I want to grab a field from the database itself. So I can go over here and maybe I want to know the bill type. So I can go grab this field from the database, and I can drag it out here onto the report as well. So just grabbing those fields, dropping them out here, and I can manipulate those. So again, like I said before, some of the things are pretty easy to do in the designer. So if you have some minor customization you want to do on an existing format, you can just go into the designer here, the editor. You can move the fields around. You can add some different labels. You can change the colors and the styles and things like that. Before we move on, a couple more options we have up here at the top. We've got some different views. So the designer, that's what we're doing right now. And these also equate to these little buttons down here at the bottom. But the designer, and then we've got preview. So I'll show you that in a second. HTML view just shows you what it's going to look like in HTML. And then we've got this other part here about scripts. So scripts are a place that you don't want to change. The scripts are something that's part of the editor. It's something that we put into the system when we deployed this into BOSS. And so typically, this is an area that you should not be making any changes to. If you feel like you need to have this degree of control where you need to go into the scripts, then you need to call us first, and we need to talk about that. So primarily, you're going to be working in the designer view and then the preview. So the preview is nice because I've made some changes, and before I publish this out to the database, I might want to see what this looks like. So in this case, I'm going to go to this preview, and we see there's a number of parameters here. And so this part too might be a little confusing in the beginning. There's a number of them here, but not all of these are required. So with a little experience, you get to realize, which ones are important, which ones are critical to have in the system. In this case, I've got a job ID that I want to use. So this is an existing job, but I want to see what this would look like for that job. So I typed in the job ID, and the rest of these I'm going to leave blank or leave in their default. So I'll press submit. And then when I do that, we should see the report here displayed. And sure enough, it's got my picture on it. It's got this deep dive text, and it also brought in from the database the fact that this is a budget bill type. So I went and made those changes on the editor, and so I can see them here in my preview. So if I thought this looked good, one of the things I can do is I could publish this. So I say, okay, this is exactly what I want to do. This is what I want my users to have. So I can go ahead and publish this. So now it's published and available to everybody to use. So let's look at that in BOSS and see how that works. So here we go. So this is my job that I had, that job number 656. So we'll click in here to the job itself. So my local machine seems to be taking a while here. All right. So we'll say we'll print the contract. And then here I've got my sample. I just made that. So we'll say we want to print that sample contract because I made it available to the end users. So here is my other screen, so I'll drag it over. So here's my new custom format that has all the changes in it that I made with the Report Designer. So that's kind of how it works. Bring this back out of the way. So, let's say that looked good, or maybe I want to make some changes, and now I don't want to publish it. I don't want it to be available. The trick there right now, it shows it's published. The only thing I need to do is just press on this little save button. And when I do, it becomes not published, so it's no longer then available, so I can make changes. Some other things to think about when you work on these is, don't publish it until you're ready, until you've tested it, and then maybe when you do publish it, you go first and try it on a couple of jobs or invoices or job tickets or whatever it is that you're going to do. If you're going to update maybe an existing layout, an existing customization you have, and it's fairly complex, what you might want to do is open that existing customization and save it as something else. And so work on it until you get it all working well. And then remember, we can always go up here and we could delete the old version, and then we could just rename our new version to essentially replace it. And that way you're not working on something that everybody else is counting on. You're able to work with it until you get it working exactly like you want. You've tested it and everything like that. The other thing to remember is I talked about the scripts, so be sure not to go in and modify any scripts or change anything there. Remember too that if you get that warning dialog when you first open up the designer, that probably you're using the wrong version of the designer for your instance of BOSS. If you have any questions about that, then you should contact us here at support, and we'll look at that too to make sure that you've got the right versions. Also, make sure you read the release notes so that you're using the correct version of the designer with BOSS. So this was the basics of the report designer. As I said, simple things are pretty simple, dragging and dropping things around, changing fonts, changing colors, putting different fields on there, those kinds of things. No harm. You guys can go in here and experiment with those types of things. When you get into the different bands and some of the other things that are going on with BOSS, some of those can be a little complex. They don't have to be, but sometimes when you have information within different bands, then it becomes a little bit more complex. And then, you might need some help with that. So we'll be glad to help you with those kinds of things. But hopefully what we presented with you today make you feel a little bit more comfortable about getting into the designer. So again, we'll have a document on the support site that kind of goes over most of what I talked about and perhaps even a little bit more detail. If you want to use a designer and you're not using it yet, go get the document because it'll tell you the information we need from you so we can get you set up. And then just let us know if you have any questions or you want to get it set up with the designer. So that's the end of the deep dive today. If you have any questions, go ahead and I guess type them into your question box. If you don't and you think of something later, feel free to put in an issue with the support site. If you have any questions at all, we'll be glad to help you with the designer. Even if you're working on it yourself and you get stuck on something, just let us know. We'll be glad to help you. So with that being said, short presentation today, but hopefully get you guys started and get you comfortable with what it does. And I don't see any questions, so we'll go ahead and wrap up. If you have any questions later, just let us know here at the support site, and appreciate your time this morning. Thank you.